What's going on, guys? About to react to a Bill Maher video. In this video, you're going to see why Bill Maher is no different from any other atheist. He's just a puppet parroting misinformation that is just factually incorrect. Man, let's get into it.
I believe in Jesus, by the way. We'll talk about that.
Oh.
I'm reading The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's convincing evidence.
What do you think? I throw people out of the club here? We believe in whatever you want.
I didn't. I went to Catholic school my whole life, but after reading this book, Case for Christ by Lee Strobel, the factual evidence that he existed is kind of overwhelming.
I'd like to see that because the factual evidence that he existed has always been underwhelming. In fact, it's always...
Read Case for Christ.
Yeah, I will.
Give it a shot by Lee Strobel.
This is based on what? Archaeological finds?
Archaeological finds.
New ones?
Theological finds. Ivy League.
What are theological finds?
Bill, ready for this?
Yeah.
If I told you, okay, if I told you factual evidence about Alexander the Great, you would believe me.
Okay, but even still, it's a silly point because who cares if Jesus lived? It's whether he's then died and was reborn and is, up in heaven with his Father who's really him. Okay. That's the part where the rubber meets the road. Maybe he existed. I agree. That's absolutely possible. Fine. He may have existed.
But according to Case for Christ, independent sources who didn't know each other, who wrote about him within 20 years of his death, talked about these miracles happening as in real time.
Okay, well, again...
And Alexander the Great's biographers, the earliest one was like 100 years after he died.
Chris, I'm going to have to burst your bubble now because I have to spit a couple of facts at you that are kind of going to under... Okay.
It's Hollywood.
There's only two sources in the Bible. Okay. There's the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay. There's also another guy, Josephus, who wasn't accepted, but read the Case for Christ.
Not in the Bible.
Okay.
But the Bible is itself an anthology. They found some few decades ago the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were other books that were just basically edited out. So right away we know a person decided what constituted the Bible, and just some stuff wound up on the cutting room floor.
I get it. Council of Nicaea. I get it.
Council of Nicaea, yes.
325 AD. Yes. That's when they decided the Christian religion. I agree with you.
Right.
I'm with you on that.
I remember that.
But I'm telling you, read this book.
That's Emperor Constantine.
Shout out Constantine, Turkey, all that.
Well, the first one...
Constantinople.
The first one to change the Roman Empire to a Christian empire.
They decided all the holidays.
Took 3 centuries.
I get it. And listen, Bill, I'm with you on that.
But here's the important point.
Let's do it.
There's only these 5 sources.
A little bit more tequila, that's it.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
I'm wrecked right now.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Good boys.
Not contemporaries of Jesus, not even close. Matthew, so they lived from 70 to 110 years after him.
I understand.
No, from 40 to 70 years after.
But they got their information from Josephus, who lived about 10 years after Jesus.
So already we're into a game of telephone. Okay.
Bill, yes, but
the other person,
I want to make you let your point, but let me just quickly. The game of telephone, yes, I agree with you that point, but the game of telephone in Jesus' times, according to Lee Strobel in The Case of Christ, was the simple fact of we're playing the game of telephone. There's 10 people here. The game of telephone, as we know it today, is you say something in my ear and then it goes around 10 times, and by the time it gets to you, it's something radically different. This game of telephone, this ancient game of telephone was... But you tell it to me, then the third guy confirms what you said before it goes to the fourth guy. So there's a level of checking, checks and balances.
Chris, hey, Bill Maher is noticeably uncomfortable in this conversation. I don't think Bill Maher is even interested, which is totally not being open-minded. It's being irrational, actually.
You're working too hard. If you want to believe this shit, believe it. You don't have to convince me or
I'm just convincing you of Case for Christ.
Or construct this scaffolding to which you hang this belief. Just believe it. It's all good.
Okay.
Don't
come to me, and when you die at St. Peter's, I'm not getting you in.
But I can't go there with you. It's just it's silly.
I'm just saying it's nice the idea to believe in something. I'm just trying it on for size.
Here's also what's very interesting, and then I'll leave this subject, because, excuse me, I think I've bored the audience with this before, but...
What do you think Barbara in Milwaukee gives a... They turned this off, when they found out I wasn't Ellen.
Yeah, that's the kind of audience we have.
Your audience is great.
So...
you think they'll like me?
St. Paul
good guy St. Paul, a.k.a. Saul, and the capital of Minnesota.
Is the other source of the Bible.
Yes.
There's Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. I said the two names out of order because that's the order in the Bible. The first gospel, Mark, is 70 AD. Jesus dies in 33. So that's 40 years almost after he died.
Okay.
So not contemporaries. Paul comes before the gospel writers. He's writing around the year 50. In the 50s.
Okay.
So he's much closer to Jesus's time. So you'd think he would know more about Jesus than the people who came later, but actually St. Paul knows almost nothing about Jesus. He barely conceives of him as as a person who lived on earth. There's no details about his life like they are in the Gospels. So the people who came later know more than the person who wrote earlier. Just some food for thought.
But, okay, I understand. But he does acknowledge at some point, right? Paul, aka Saul, knows that Jesus existed, right? He talks about him.
He talks about, I'm saying he conceives him as a Godhead. He doesn't have this, it's not the narrative that's in the Gospels of Jesus went around and he did miracles and he did stuff and everybody loved him and he gets quoted a lot. He makes speeches, blessed are the meek. You know, he has adventures. He goes into the desert. It's a whole thing.
But what about...
And then at the end, it's a whole drama with, he's crucified. Oh, no. Paul doesn't know any of this. All the stuff that the gospel writers obsess about and that are his biography. It's a little strange.
But Paul, it's okay for Paul to be somebody who maybe, there was a lot of people who didn't like Jesus.
You know what's okay?
And that's okay.
What's okay is that some people believe and other people don't. That's what's okay. It's like, that's you.
Yeah.
And
I'm not trying to put it on you. I'm just saying what I believe.
I know. And
I'm wearing a corduroy shirt my mother got me for Christmas, and I feel confident.
Okay, listen, Bill Maher said a lot of factually incorrect information. All of the Gospels were written between 60 and 80 AD, which is well within the time frame of living eyewitnesses. So Bill Maher, that's a moot point. It doesn't matter. They were still alive, and many of the eyewitnesses were still alive. John, the apostle, was still alive during that time. The early church fathers attest that the Gospel of Mark was written by a man named Mark. The apostle John said out of his own mouth that Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark. Church fathers, writers like Clement of Alexandria, Origen, Jerome, Tertullian, Irenaeus, all attest to the Gospel of Mark being written by Mark. And although Mark was not an apostle or disciple, Mark got his information from Peter, who was an eyewitness. There's not really much debate on this one. The Gospel of Luke was written by Luke. The same early church fathers and writers attest to this gospel being written by him. Luke was a doctor and historian, and Luke got his information from eyewitnesses as well. Luke 1 says, "Inasmuch as many have undertaken to compile a narrative of things that have been accomplished among us, just as those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word have delivered them to us, it seemed good to me also, having followed all things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus." So Luke himself is saying that he's getting this information from eyewitnesses, and he wants to make a very historically accurate, orderly account for his friend Theophilus. And the Gospel of John was written by John. Even his own gospel says that he wrote the Gospel of John, and he calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. John 21:24 says, "This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things." The early church father Irenaeus wrote, "Afterwards, John, the disciple of the Lord, who also leaned upon his breast, did himself publish the gospel during his residence at Ephesus in Asia." Irenaeus lived in the 2nd century and claimed to receive this information from John's disciple Polycarp. Early church leaders agree that Matthew wrote the Gospel of Matthew, pulling from Mark's account. The details and the style and the organization of thought and the many references of money all indicate a tax collector wrote the gospel according to Matthew. So all of the gospels were in fact eyewitness accounts. And Bill is just flat out incorrect as it relates to Paul. Paul, when he was converted, he went immediately and began preaching the gospel to the Jews, showing them from the Old Testament that Jesus was the Christ. In terms of Paul not affirming Christ and the resurrection, that is just flat out wrong. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me.
He does acknowledge at some point, right? Paul, aka Saul, knows that Jesus existed, right? He talks about him.
He talks about, I'm saying he conceives him as a Godhead. He doesn't have this, it's not the narrative that's in the Gospels of Jesus went around and he did miracles and he did stuff and everybody loved him.
This is Paul affirming the gospel, affirming the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and affirming the after effects. Paul was absolutely a contemporary of Christ and someone who affirmed the entire story. Like most atheists, Bill Maher is stuck in his camp. He is not willing to look at Lee Strobel's book, The Case for Christ. He is not willing to examine the evidence with an open mind. Instead, he wants to continue parroting false information. That is absolutely wrong. He's willfully ignorant, but he's also just living in pride. He doesn't want Christ to be real. He doesn't want the gospel to be true. He says that it doesn't matter if Jesus lived. Did the other things happen? And do we have eyewitnesses? Do we have people in the Bible who affirmed it? Yes, we do, and it does matter. Bill Maher showed us true colors. He is someone who is turning a blind eye to the evidence that is available to him because he doesn't want God to be real. He doesn't believe in God, but he also hates him. Just pray for Bill Maher. For you Christian, you can absolutely believe that the Gospels are written by the people who claim to have wrote them, and we can have assurance in the Bible's veracity. It is something that God preserved for 2,000 years, longer than that, but for 2,000 years for us. And the continued attacks on the Bible's veracity absolutely fall short. If you enjoyed this video, you want more content like this, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. Like this video. I'll be back next week with another one. This is Pastor Frederick, and everything I do is by the book. Peace.